My name is Catherine. I chose The Charge of the Light Brigade for my poem, and it was written by Lord Tennyson Alfred, and it was based on a battle in 1854, the Crimean battle, I'm assuming. Maybe just demolishing that word, but it's C-R-I-M-E-A-N, Crimean. That's what it looks like, it sounds. At any rate, so I chose this poem because I'm just fascinated with world events, and the fact that this poem, one, was based on a true story or an actual event makes it, that much more meaningful to me. And it talks about in this poem the bravery and the perseverance of these soldiers and what their strong mind and strong will can accomplish when you put your mind to something. And it's just, I really enjoyed reading it. It was actually my lieutenant, who is full-time in the military. Well, he's not full-time in the military, but he's in the military. He actually told me to read it. So, and I did, and I really enjoyed it. I really did. So that's what I've chosen. And basically what this poem is about is a poem about this brigade of soldiers. And they forge into war, and they're on horseback, and they have swords, and that's pretty much all they got besides their gumption. And they push into this battle, and this enemy is armed with knives and cannons and guns. Well, no, it didn't say anything about knives. But they're armed with cannons and guns and all this stuff that makes it a whole lot easier to kill people versus a sword and a horse. You gotta be really, really, really close to kill somebody with a sword. So basically, the beginning of the poem, it starts off with half a league, half a league, half a league onward. And a league is an old method of measurement that means a mile and a half. I did some research on the poem. So I'm not sure if they're talking about it's a mile and a half or it's 3 miles, because it repeats it a couple times. I think there's some emphasis on the half a league onward. And it just, that's kind of given how far away from the battle they are. And it talks, the next line in there is all in the valley of death. So basically, these soldiers are going to what they consider the valley of death. Although it's not literally a valley of death, it is figuratively, and I guess kind of literally it is. It's an area where they're going to die and they're going to kill people. That's just the reality of it. That's how it's going to go down. So the next line is, it rode the 600. So it's telling me that these 600 soldiers rode into this battle, this valley of death, onward. The next line, it talks about forward the light brigade. Now, he's telling these soldiers, forward, go forward, push forward. And the light brigade is not a bright idea. I made a joke. It's, they had a heavy brigade, and then they had a light brigade. And I don't know the difference specifically, because I couldn't really find any information on it. Whether or not, the light brigade was just less soldiers or less equipment, versus the heavy brigade. But, when it talks about all in the valley of death, it kind of resembles that Bible verse that talks, as I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, for I fear no evil. And that's kind of what it reminds me. But it goes on to say, charge for the guns, he said. So this guy, I'm assuming it's a commander, is telling these soldiers, these 600 of the light brigade, to push forward, to charge for the guns. And basically, you've got these guys riding in on horseback, charging from the guys with the guns, charging the enemy line. Again, into the valley of death. And they're getting closer. The closer they get, the scarier things seem to be. You know, the next phrase of it repeats itself. Forward, the light brigade. He's constantly telling them, let's go forward, push through. And the next line, it says, was there a man dismayed? It asks, you know, it's asking basically if the soldiers were worried about this decision to go into battle. You know, are they equipped enough? Are they going to succeed? Are they going to, you know, get through this thing alive? And it goes on to say, not though the soldier knew. And I think that means that they are oblivious. Not though the soldier knew. I think the soldiers were oblivious to whether or not this decision may or may not have probably been the best one that this guy's ever had. Someone had blundered is the next line, and I think that's stating this was not a great idea. You've done better, you know. But it goes on to say that there's not to make reply, there's not to reason why, there's but to do or die. Basically saying that these soldiers are not, they're not asking why, they're not talking back, they're just doing it. They're doing what they're told because that's what soldiers do. You know, I mean, this was based in 1854. They're not going to question their commander. They're just, he tells them to go jump off a bridge, they're jumping off a bridge. You know, into the valley of death again, rode the 600. So at this point, they still had 600. They were still pushing into battle. They were still, you know, not questioning anything. They're just doing what they're told. It goes on to say in phase 3, you know, they had cannons to the right of them, cannons to the left of them, and cannons in front of them. And basically saying that they are literally surrounded by battle. They're surrounded by cannons. They're surrounded by guns. They're surrounded. Just, it's in their face. You know, valleyed in thunder. Valleyed is a word or a term that's used meaning first round of fire. So when it's not a first round of fire, but it's like a round of firing. So if you've got a whole bunch of cannons or a whole bunch of gunfire that go off at once, you know, that's the word that they were using to explain this. Thundered is, you know, although it's not thunder, I'm sure it resembles thunder. I'm sure it sounds ridiculously like thunder. It's so loud. If you've never heard a gunshot go off, one gunshot is piercing. You know, I've forgot to put my ears on a few times on the firing line, and it gets, we call it RFL, but it gets real loud real fast. So, stormed at the shot and shell, basically saying that they were storming the enemy, and the shot are bullets and the shells are cannons. So they're being stormed at with shot and shell. So these guys are shooting guns at them, shooting cannons at them. They're trying to take them down. You know, boldly they rode and well. So even though these enemies are shooting at them and sending cannons their ways, they're still riding in. They're still on it. They got this. They're hanging it. You know, into the mouth of hell. Again, that's, I think, it's repeating itself in every phrase. I think it's saying, you know, just how scary this is. That it probably feels like hell. It probably feels like a nightmare. And rode the 600. So at this point, they're still all alive. The next phrase of the poem, it goes on to say, you know, flashed all their sabers bare. So that kind of tells me that, you know, they pulled their swords out, or their sabers, and I kind of get the idea that that's really all they had. You know, they're riding into battle with sabers against guys with guns and cannons. It's not really a good odd, but that's all they had. That's what they were working with. You know, flashed as they turned in air. And I think that's meaning that they pulled their swords out and they were engaging in sword fights. They were slicing these dudes up left and right, sabering the gunners there. So I think they were chopping the guys with guns up. You know, realistically, I think that's what that part of the poem means, is they pulled their sabers out, they were flashing them, they were cutting people up and sabering the gunners there. I think they were slicing and dicing right there where they stood. You know, charging an army while all the world wondered. Now, in this poem, wondered is meaning to be amazed. And basically, they're charging this army and with swords on horseback, fighting a army filled with guns and cannons, and the whole world is amazed. I would be too. They're showing extreme amounts of bravery, and it's just ridiculous, you know. Plunged, it says plunged in the battery smoke. So basically saying they pushed in, they're jumping into the battery smoke. You know, the guns and the cannons and everything like that, when they're going off and you've got all these explosions, it creates an enormous amount of smoke. And especially back in the olden days, when they were using just raw gunpowder, I mean, you could probably see a war zone from a ways away with all that smoke and that explosion and everything like that. Everything just burned so much easier. Their gunpowder was a lot rawer, but right through the line they broke. So it talks. Basically, what they're saying is these soldiers on these horses, these 600 soldiers on these horses, ran through all these cannons. They ran through all these guns and all these soldiers and through the smoke. You know, the smoke is the line. Where that smoke's, you know, shortly after that is where you're going to find probably a majority of your soldiers behind the cannons, behind the guns. So they ran through that smoke and they broke that front line of the enemy line. And it goes on to say that this is the first time that it referenced the enemies, the Kozak and the Russians, reeled from the saber stroke, shattered and sundered. So they ran in as hard and as fast they could, and basically they broke that enemy. They shattered them, broke them in half. Their bravery is extremely evident. How courageous you have to be to run into gunfire like that and to run past them and to just keep going. That's ultimately what they're doing. Then they rode back, but not the 600. So it's saying that after this war, after this battle, that they lost some soldiers in this fight, unfortunately. But they were on their way home. And it goes on to say cannons to the right of them, cannon to the left, cannon behind them. So they're leaving all this in the past. They've already done what they've got to do, and they are leaving. Valleyed and thundered goes on to, you know, to tell again how loud it was, and stormed and shot, stormed at with shot and shell. You know, these soldiers were just ridiculous. They were, you know, ill-equipped, but going into a battle where people had cannons and guns, and they were just being stormed at from probably every angle you can imagine. They that had fought so well, you know, just talking again about the bravery of the soldiers and how courageous they were, and it ultimately cost them their lives. They came through the jaws of death, back from the mouth of hell. All that was left of them, left of 600. So they finished this battle. You know, they went through all these tremendous events, and some of them didn't make it alive. Some of them died. So that's pretty much what it explained. And they left the gates of hell. They left the mouth of hell, the jaws of death. They escaped. They survived. They persevered, and now they've left. The last phrase of the paragraph talks about, when can their glory fade? Oh, the wild charge they made. All the world wondered. Honor the courage they made. Honor the Light Brigade, the noble 600. So regardless how many soldiers died in this battle, every single one of them was a hero. Every single one of them was honored. Their glory will never fade. It was a wild charge they made. Probably not the best idea, but they pulled it off. You know, it unfortunately cost some of the soldiers their lives, but they will always be remembered, is what this is saying. Honor the charge they made. They did this for a reason. They did this for a cause. And, you know, they came out. Maybe not all of them so well, but some of them did. You know, it definitely counts as a victory. So that's my poem. You know, there's some points in there that has some foreshadowing, you know, in the beginning when it's talking about the Valley of Death, rode the 600, forward the Light Brigade. And, you know, some of the stuff that it talks about in there, like the mouth of hell. It's not literally the mouth of hell, if there was such a place, but it is probably the closest thing that you will see to it. Anyways, I hope this is what I needed, and thanks for tuning in.